Hey everybody, welcome back to Of Chorus. So today, one of the things I want to talk about is a question that you see come up fairly often in real life and on the internet, and it regards recording vocals, right? Everybody's, please give us more information about recording vocals, and do I have the right microphone? Do I have the right preamp and stuff like that? And this video isn't so much to be a step-by-step how-to. I'm going to save that for another video. I figured we'd start the conversation about recording vocals with more of a philosophy angle, right? So, one thing that comes up all the time is, do I need a Neumann microphone to record amazing vocals, or is my interface good enough? Is a XYZ interface good enough? And sure, all these things come into play, and different factors will ultimately create different results. But there's some things you can do fundamentally that will make a huge difference in the outcome, regardless of your microphone, regardless of your preamp, regardless of your compressor, or even if you have one. Any equipment specific decision is notwithstanding compared to the general philosophy that I want to talk about today. Now, obviously, you're going to need a microphone and a preamp just to get the job done, but I don't want you to stress about if you got the right one, if you've got the best, or even if you don't have a compressor or what have you. A lot of technical knowledge is based on history. It's kind of what works and what doesn't work. And, you can read about what microphone Willie Nelson used, but unless your voice sounds just like Willie Nelson and you're singing a song just like the one he used, that advice might not be, totally appropriate. And there are also some things that are just kind of evergreen, reliable devices. A API 512 mic pre is always going to deliver a usable vocal, or LA2A is always going to compress a vocal in a pleasing way. And yeah, just about any Neumann whatsoever will accurately capture a vocal. But, rather than getting down this rabbit hole of what mic matched with what pre on what kind of voice, I want to talk about simple steps that you can do to just make sure that you get the best performance on tape. Think about your singer. Think about, are they comfortable? Are they prepared? All these things will supersede a majority of technical issues that you might encounter. For example, if you got a rock singer, let them hold the microphone in their hand, and crank the speakers up. I don't know, you might not be working in a studio that has soffit mounted speakers, but just the speakers right there in front of you will get somewhat loud enough to let a singer, hold a SM58 in their hand and sing like it's a live show. And so what? You get a little bit of bleed. I mean, as long as they're singing the same song that the band is playing, bleed really shouldn't matter that much, and I don't know this firsthand, but from what I understand, Bono does a lot of vocals like this. He'll take a 58, hold it in his hand, crank the playbacks, and just go for it as if he was on stage. There's very few vocal performances from Bono that made me say, geez, what is this guy thinking? Or, geez, that's the completely wrong microphone, Another example is Tom Petty. He's notorious for using the SM57 for his vocals. It's the most ubiquitous mic on the planet, and it's got to be that way for a reason, right? But how come we don't often see it as the vocal mic of choice for a lead singer? Tom Petty did it quite often, right? So another thing to think about is headphones. That's not a natural thing, to sing while you're wearing headphones, and the relationship of the sound the singer is hearing in the headphones to the bone conduction that's moving right through their head to their ears. It really translates the way you hear the voice through their mic as much as the way they hear their voice through the mic, and so there's another rabbit hole there too with head-related transfer function. It's a topic for another video, but try it yourself. Sing out loud, then put your finger in your ear and sing, and then sing into a mic with the signal blasting back in the headphones. And, imagine some knucklehead telling you, oh, that's not quite it, or I think your pitch is off. It's like, yeah, dummy, I'm singing through headphones with my finger in my ear. It's like your pitch can totally get out of whack if you're listening to your voice vibrating through your skull as opposed to, coming back through headphones or blasting through speakers. It's each of those is a different way of listening, and it adjusts your performance accordingly, you know? So while I'm in the neighborhood, I'll point out another rabbit hole for another video. But there's a neat trick where you can actually use a pair of speakers set in an equilateral triangle with one of them flipped out of phase, so that when the signal meets at the microphone, they cancel out, and all you're left with is the singer. And that way the singer can get a really nice, intimate vocal by using speakers, you know, in a small vocal booth or something like that. Auratones work great for that. And again, we'll talk that at another point. But the first topic that I wanted to talk about today in vocal land is headphones. Is you really do have to spend a lot of time making sure the headphones are right. The blend and the volume of the headphones can make a huge difference in the way a performer responds vocally. Try one ear off, or low volume and loud volume, and or send the mic to tape, but don't send the mic back to the headphones, so that the singer is only hearing the bone conduction and the ambient sound of the room for their own monitoring of themselves. You can try a one earplug in to change the amount of bone conduction, and there's still things you can do to make adjustments. But my point is, you really want to work very, very hard to make sure your singer is comfortable in the headphones. And probably the number one reason for that is because of the dynamic range. And I would probably say, technically, the biggest, technical challenge of vocals is usually dynamic range. Having a mic pre and a preamp that can handle a huge dynamic range is a great advantage. But you actually have a couple of dynamic range tools at your fingertips. I mean, obviously, if you have a compressor in the vocal chain, that can help too, but that can bite you if you're not careful, for obvious reasons. Again, we'll save that for another video. But what do you do if you don't have a compressor, or if you're on a DAW that has too much latency to use a plug-in while you're recording? Well, let's look at history. There's this huge reason that Tom Dowd started experimenting with linear faders, which we take for granted now, that we've seen so many recording consoles with linear faders, and the model of volume controls in Pro Tools is a linear fader. But there was a time where they didn't have that, and you were trying to adjust the gain. You're physically adjusting the gain structure while you're recording in reaction to what the singer is singing. And Tom Dowd felt like it was probably a little more, he had a little more access to the subtlety by taking a fader and putting it over a linear path, rather than that same fader working in a range on a dial. So this kind of stuff was definitely more crucial in the analog tape days, when you had to hit the tape at a very consistent level, to fight background noise and hiss and all the nightmares of dealing with analog tape. But it can make a huge difference in the digital world too, right? So if you have a preamp that happens to have a fader or an output volume, that's great. Then use that. Set your preamp to the appropriate dynamic range for the singer and the song, and then use that output volume, or that output fader, to adjust the volume and to play with it. But if you don't have that, you can still do it with just your preamp knob. The Focusrite interface is one of the most ubiquitous out there these days. The little red box with two mic inputs and a headphone and a volume. Everybody's got one of those nowadays. The input gain on those things is fantastically smooth, and you can adjust while your singer's singing. Don't be afraid to get in there and learn the song and practice the song and make those adjustments in dynamic, in concert with your singer, and you'll be amazed at how much better your vocal consistency can be with just really some off-the-shelf gear. One caveat though, you should be careful if your preamp is stepped, because you'll be jumping in like 3 to 5 dB increments, and sometimes there's a slight click when you're adjusting the input gain knob. But either way, just try it out. It'll very likely be a workable solution. I hate to bust the set it and forget it vibes, but you kind of have to learn the song and lock in with the singer, and you perform your adjustments in sync with their performance. But trust me, it makes a huge difference. You'll get all that tasty dynamic range that you might from a compressor, but none of the distortion or the compression artifacts, which will also be the topic of another video. Great performers like this, even ones I've worked with, like Harry Connick Jr., I've had really good luck with this technique. Terrence Blanchard's trumpet playing is so insanely dynamic that if I wasn't able to adjust the preamp, I would never be able to capture him on a recording, and a compressor would just totally distort his tone and all the subtlety that he's putting into his technique. I know it's real old school engineering, but nothing else really sounds quite like it. So I invite you to play with that, and if you experiment with it, leave me a comment. Let me know what your adventures are. So something else to consider when you're recording vocals. Yes, it gets logarithmically easier when you have a super sensitive condenser mic and a preamp with dynamic range to spare. Just remember that the most important thing about the human voice is convincing the human ear that the emotional content that you're trying to convey is intact. And so even if you're lucky enough to have a vocal worthy compressor that you can insert into the chain, that can go a long way. But again, you don't want to get caught down the rabbit hole of compression. There's so many variables that can happen between the way you have the microphone in relationship to the singer's face, the preamp, the setting of the preamp in relation to the output capacity of the microphone. Making sure those things are set right are far more important than if I have a compressor or not, because even if you have a compressor, you still have to make sure your gain staging is set. It's critical, because you don't want to drive the compressor too hard. You don't want to make it work outside of its most usable range. There's a spot where compression is transparent. There's a spot where compression has a timbre of its own, and if you don't have the mic pre and the microphone set right in relation to the singer and the song and, that emotional stuff, the compressor doesn't matter if it's a $10,000 compressor or a $100 compressor. It's not going to work in its best range. Right. And so I know I'm promising a lot of rabbit holes, but compression is going to be a whole month of conversations that we'll have. So I would say the number one piece of advice I have that makes a difference in recording vocals comes from my late mentor, Keith Keller. Many times I saw him advise singers to consider the microphone diaphragm as if it were their lover's ear. If you were going to say something soft and intimate to your lover in their ear, you would lean in and you would say it soft and intimately. And likewise, if you were passionate and you had to communicate something aggressively to this person that you care about, you wouldn't lean into their ear and do it. You would back off and let your voice carry in the room and let it become more of a visceral thing. You treat a microphone the same exact way, and so nowadays we have the stockings on the ring, the pea poppers and the spit screens and stuff like that. But just be mindful that anything you put between the singer and the microphone is going to change the sound of the voice in the microphone. So nothing is as good a substitute for proper vocal technique, or for that really polished vocal technique. We all know the legend of John Lennon, able to aim his S's away from the microphone so they don't distort. That's what sibilance is just a distorted S. The microphone diaphragm doesn't handle the letter S very well, and there's no way around that. And so all you can do is have a singer who knows how to adjust themselves accordingly. Another difficult one is what they call plosives, the letters P and B. Think of the energy that's built up behind your teeth and your lips when you go to make those sounds. You're going to then blast it onto the diaphragm of the microphone. The pop filter can get in the way, but you're changing the sound of you're changing the purity and the clarity. Suppose you want the purest and clearest connection between the vocal and the microphone. You're not going to want to put a pop filter in between. I got a chance to see this firsthand. I was lucky enough to record Robert Plant one time, and he had his face right up against the Neumann U47 microphone, which is one of the most sensitive microphones out there. And every time he would say the letter P, he would turn his head ever so slightly so that the energy from the letter P didn't go directly into the microphone. It just kind of glanced off to the side. And I looked over a couple of times, and the needle on the compressor didn't even dance when he did this. And that's the kind of thing you have to practice. It's the kind of thing your singers have to practice. You have to make you have to allow your singers to be comfortable enough to be able to do that. Otherwise, you're going to be chasing things. You're going to go into Pro Tools and try to adjust the waveform and all kinds of nightmares. It's far better to encourage a singer to find that comfort zone where they're able to turn their head at the appropriate moment to direct the energy away from the diaphragm, or, in a different direction. There's things you can do with, you put a chopstick in front of the diaphragm or a pencil or something like that. None of it is a reasonable replacement for a singer with proper technique. So this is just a getting started. Let's call this part 1 of vocal recording philosophy. We'll get more into the technical tips and tricks as we go. But I want to thank you for joining me and, joining the conversation. Feel free to leave me comments and your thoughts and your adventures with some of these techniques. Until next time, just remember, of course, it's that easy.